Thank you, Nathan. And what a pleasure to be here in Portland. As Nathan talked about my history, we were retired in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And that was 2 years ago. It was the coldest, wintry, longest, and as my wife said, the snow came up to my shoulders when I went to dig my dog out of the kennel. And so a call came from a search firm and said, we'd like to have you consider going back to work. And they wanted to know if I was available, and Barbara asked, my wife, I'll introduce her in just a moment, said, where's it at? And the search firm guy said, Oregon. She said, we're going. So we had no bargaining chip. And she's a fourth generation Oregonian. She had gone to Willamette University, and we met at Oregon State. And we're both biologists, and we thought we'd join the Peace Corps, but there wasn't any opportunities that we were interested in, so we decided to go to the Midwest as a Peace Corps alternative. And so we spent most of our career in Wisconsin, from Wisconsin to Iowa to Louisiana to Alabama. And because I like to fish, we were going to retire on the coast. And another call came from a search firm, said, we need you to go and work with the university in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And we'll talk about some of that as I present my discussion. But first of all, Barbara, would you stand up and some of you, if you're interested in environment, she and a professor from University of Minnesota co-authored the book called Environmental Science. We've authored books in botany, and we're very happy being faculty members and working with students, as many of you are here today. And so when I first started publishing and doing all that academic stuff, went to the president, and I said, you know, and Barbara worked for him. She was tenured in biology and was working for the president. And I said, you know what, I'd really like to have, I was making $8,200. And I'd like to have, you know, $400 for my reprints so I can send them out to my colleagues. That's how things were done. And so he kind of looked back and he thought about it. And he says, oh, Dr. Saigo. I said, yes, sir. He said, if I did this for you, I'd have to do it for everybody. And my heart just jumped through my throat, and I was just stricken. I was an assistant professor. And I said, you know what, sir? If you did this for everybody, you'd have one hell of a university. Thank you a lot. And that's when I decided I had to become an administrator. So you guys get the drift, you know, of where we were and what things we would go through, and we're going to follow along. And what I want to do, and I've told students at noon today, mentors and students, and I talk to young people, and I tell them, I'm going to give you one point of advice, and it's going to make you the most successful person that you possibly can be. You know, Americans are wonderful. We just like one-sentence success stories. We don't want a whole paragraph, right? We don't want 10 pages. Just tell me the bottom line. Not the richest, but the most successful. And that's to practice this afternoon what the other person is thinking. And if you practice that like in athletics, in a decade, you will be the most successful person that you possibly can be. And that's really difficult because I know, listening to everybody here in your administration, that Lewis and Clark, I feel from my perspective, is going through a huge transition period in the history of this institution. And I don't think anybody knows. Certainly I don't, faculty don't, students don't, community don't, of where this is going to end up. Universities, education, society has a tremendous amount of energy, and we just don't know how these things are going to work out. But what a heck of a part that you are going to play in the way the institution and the community is going to change. So you are in a very, very pivotal part of the future of our society, as well as this community, as well as LNC. All right? All right, the other thing I'm going to ask you, I just told you about, we're going to take a trip. And this is going to be kind of interactive. I hate that. God, when I was a student, I want to hide. I want to sit in the back and I avert my eyes because the professor's looking for somebody, right? But I'm going to get you involved because this is a small enough group. You're going to go with me on a trip. I want you to start changing your appearance. You're not what you look like in the mirror. You look kind of like me. All right? Bing, bing, okay? Next, you're going to go on a trip, and you're going to start to feel the way I'm going to try and describe so that you can kind of come along and hopefully assist on how we're going to traverse the time that we have together today. So we've heard from the federal government, and this is an hour-long presentation, but I'm cut it down to about 20, 30 minutes. And so we're going to go pretty quickly, okay? So you got to kind of pay attention. And if you start to get drool down here, I'm going to get you. All right? And so we have been told that you're Japanese Americans and that no matter what, you're going to have to leave your homes and be incarcerated. All right? You're going to be excluded. You're going to be identified. And where are you going to go? We don't know. But we hear this, and you see the newspapers, ouster of all Japs in California, also Oregon and Washington. And that term is not any different than the N-word. And so it's very derogatory. And so sometimes when they ask people in Japan, what do you think about that? They'll say, well, there's no difficulty. It's not offensive. And yet, for Americans, it is offensive. You have signs all over the town that tells you that you must pick up and be identified and move on. So one day, you're home, you're secure, you have a life, you have family. And so what do? You had no due process, and we were told that we're being rounded up and sent away for our own protection. And so, we're using words to justify where we are. There are no protests or uprising. There's no sit-ins. There's no marches. There's nobody that's going to help speak for your plight. I know that we have disbelief, and there's fear, uncertainty, and then you have only a few days to settle your affairs. 60% of us were U.S. citizens, 40% were children, and many were elderly. You can only take what you can carry. And so this is another part. When I talk to students and adults, this is where now your trip is getting more serious, more real. So if you can only take, what would you take? What would you carry? Any thoughts? My good friend, what would you take? What is the most dear thing that you can carry?
Well, we didn't have mobile phones then, so.
No computers, no cameras.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, when I think of books and just whatever it takes for me to connect with something
Good.
that's important to me. So whether it's an album, whether it's a book, whether it's a CD, because if you're going to be somewhere where you don't know, you need something to ground you.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
Baseball stuff.
Well, baseball was huge in the camps, and they also played high schools, and yeah, that kept people together. Absolutely. You're looking away. How about you? Yeah. Okay. She mentioned photo albums. And my parents at the time lived in Vacaville, California. And it was a community that came, and they all were from one region in Japan. And, life was pretty idyllic. We harvested fruit, and so everybody spoke the same language. Everybody, knew each other. And I met some folks that came to Southern Oregon University, and they were from Vacaville. And I talked to one a fellow who is father of a student, and he says, yeah, it's interesting because he would go along this creek, and unfortunately they built a bridge over it. But as a kid, I used to find all this stuff. I still have little jars that I found with Japanese writing in them. And I says, aha, that makes sense. My parents, and you guys are with me, okay, started dumping all of their tea sets, all of their dishes, all of their albums, all of their personal papers, and threw them and broke them into the ravine next to the creek, and then threw gasoline in and burned it. He says, that's why I found so much stuff there, and they're all busted. So if you're in this category now, what are you going to do with your car? What are you going to do with your truck? What are you going to do with your furniture, your sofa? We have no history because she said she was going to take albums, but again, going back, you can't take albums because they take space, and you can only take what you can carry. So I have no pictures of my grandparents. I have no pictures of my parents getting married. I have no pictures of my history. And so as we look at this now, I want you to think. Even today, we can't take computers. You can't take some of the things that were considered to be subversive, because that would be endangerment to your family. And some of the more educated people were taken to different camps known as more notorious kinds of relocation places. So again, think what you are going to do as you look at, like this young man, what are you going to wear? What are you going to wear? And as we dress today, I'm sure many of us would wear like jogging suits or stuff like that. But these folks were looking at, it looks like their Sunday best. And then we've heard that this is, for your own protection, this is for a camp. And yet, when you see, soldiers here and then people lined up going to trains. And again, I remember my parents talking. They didn't speak English. And so you can hear them in hushed voices talking about where we're going, and they didn't want to frighten their children, and on and on. And so it's important to visualize where we were. in the Northwest, and we're talking about Oregon and Washington and Northern California, again, you know, in the 1930s, they produced 75% of the region's produce, did everything. And so, again, we have a condition here where the immigrants were doing pretty well, and yet staying within their own communities. But now we were told we couldn't stay. Compared to the Germans and the Italians, in contrast to the Germans and Italians, the Japanese in the Pacific states, and especially in California, have been the target of hostility and restrictive action for several decades. And this comes from, you know, a report in 1964. General DeWitt, who was very powerful at the time, made this statement. And you all are LNC people. You're pretty bright. The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. Logic, philosophy, and you know, it's just wonderful. But how can you get by today? By making certain statements that because nothing has happened, it's going to happen. It's like saying, because no accidents have happened, we're going to have an accident tomorrow. And again, we'll talk about Justice Murphy, who was a dissenting opinion, and Korematsu. And again, there was no way that we could make this right. There's tremendous evacuation pressure in California, and I contend that much of the reason we were shipped off was not for security. There is no indication of any fifth column spying or subversive behavior, but I believe it was an economic decision. And so, you know, you can read this as well as I can, right? And it says, we never miss them in 2 weeks because a white farmer can take over and produce everything the Jap grows, and we don't want them back when the war ends. And I was thinking this whole time, my Chinese friends, they wore buttons that said we weren't Japanese. And so, again, how can you tell the difference? And the explanation was, you know, we can't tell the difference between subversive Japanese and people who are loyal to this country. And therefore, they all must go. Removal, evacuation, assembly, and relocation. And I talked to some of the folks here, and they're telling me about, you know, Topaz is a famous place. There's some places in Moab. Barb and I travel quite a bit and visit some of these places. There's not even a marker in some of these locations. We were around Vacaville. Here's Sacramento, Marysville. Here's Tule Lake, which is close by to southern Oregon, where many of our family had been relocated. So we went from here all the way to Gila River. And they had pretty much rented 70,000 acres from the Pima Indian tribe to house the Japanese Americans. And a side story is we were there a number of years ago from St. Cloud, and we had gone down to what was that, Barbara? Scottsdale. And the folks who were there had created Scottsdale. And so they took us to dinner and said, gee, is this your first time in Arizona? And I said, no, I lived here. Oh, are you an Indian? I said, no, we're guests of the American government. And so, you know, 2 and 2 came together. But imagine when these smaller ones were relocation. These were just sites that were temporary, and then the larger ones were more permanent. And so I had given a talk in Little Rock, University of Arkansas in Little Rock, and this is here. And they gave me rice from the field that had replaced the camps. But again, look where people were sent from all over. So kind of an interesting time, and yet we were taken from our homes right along the coast here. In preparation for leaving, I got just pictures of people harvesting before they're moved. And I'm sure all of these folks are now gone, but the pride in which they have their produce is visible in their faces. Leaving Washington, now you're still with me, okay? You're still part of this entourage, and interesting to see the sights. Here, kids are still waving flags, you know, all on. And doesn't this one get you? And we're asking you again what you would do. What do you do with your sofas? What do you do with your private security things? And here's one, when you're being trucked off, what are you going to do with your dogs? What are you going to do with your pets? And so it starts to hit you more, because I'm sure all of you have had a pet now and then, right? And so again, this one here is kind of interesting too. You see this little boy, and here a soldier that's looking over. Leaving San Francisco, goodbye to friends, and these are folks who are leaving in different cohorts. And so although this person is saying goodbye to the bus, saying goodbye, these two will also be joining them in a short time. Some of these are kind of sad because the loyalty that is shown by pledging allegiance to the flag here again, and these weren't made up. These were things that were being done at the time. And can you imagine, as a child, or you as a child, pledging allegiance to this country, and yet we are being incarcerated by our very government without due process? This is the next day. This is your new home. This is where you and I are now going to reside for maybe 4 to 6 weeks. They took us to horse stalls because where most of the temporary housing, it was a circular. There are lights, there are bathroom facilities, and it can be surrounded by fences. So all these folks can be housed in a short period of time in a location that can be guarded. And so again, can you imagine, all right, you guys are with us, there's some folks here, and we're now sitting here. The night before we had dinner. We had our own home. We had our own beds. And yet we had all of that taken away. You've been transported, and here's your new home. And so again, I'm sure, can you imagine the thought that's going through our heads right now? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? Are you scared? Are you depressed? Why didn't anybody speak for us? We didn't do anything wrong. And the discouragement and despair, I'm sure, was palpable. I think these pictures tell a whole lot. A lot of older people with kids, and this is your new home, and you're wondering, yes, what happened? I was working so hard, I was happy, I was making a living, I had a purpose. All of a sudden, you have no purpose. You're in the hands of everybody else. Moving to Manzanar, you see whatever you can carry. The camps, again, were very much like barracks, and you can see the dust and the barracks here on both sides, and this is where we resided. Here's the gentleman. This is his entire life. You can see a lot of the clothes and things have been hung up. You have a cot, generally a bed, and here he is pretty much made himself comfortable. The term evacuee kind of reminds us all, doesn't it, of people who have had some kind of a natural disaster, and then the terminology again, are we talking about evacuees? Are we internees? Are we prisoners? And so language, again, is, I think, very, very important. They're developing a community water system, and yet, when you look, you know, it's kind of frightening. But again, I think the folks got together to form a community and to do the best that they can while they could. Here, trying to develop a semblance of life. Many of the children were with us. We also had teachers, we had lawyers, we had all segments of society. And so starting out before others came, classes were being held, and some semblance of society was moving forward. Now this fellow here is me in camp, and this is my older brother. Here's the camp that is pictured here, and again, the produce farmers were fantastic. And these are the daikon radishes that we have now, and a celebration during that time. The story, Arizona's fourth largest city, 5,000 evacuees, again, internees, multi-family barracks, 20 plus persons per 20 by 100 building. And not much privacy. Here's a soldier coming back with a Purple Heart showing his younger brother what he had received. And yet he is visiting a camp where his family is being held prisoner. Some of the internees were allowed to leave to go to different locations, like in Idaho, to work as farm labor to help the war effort, because labor was very dear and sparse. And then during the war, it came to a point where the U.S. government felt that they had to shore up their troops. And so where the black military and the Japanese American military were used mainly for supplies, they turned around and decided they needed more help, so they were used in combat. And so again, we had segregated units, and here we have people from Hawaii and from the mainland forming the troops. It was interesting because Senator Inouye from Hawaii, he had one arm missing, and he talks about this. And at that time, he could never understand why the Hawaiians and the Japanese infantry army members didn't get along. And he says, you know, the Hawaiians were always having fun, dancing and joshing, whereas the American Japanese were not. And he said he was in a truck driving through, and he saw where there were people that looked like him, and they were behind barbed wire. And so he finally understood why there was such a mismatch of behavior. And remember, in Hawaii, there are no Japanese Americans where Pearl Harbor happened who were incarcerated. And so when people tell me, yeah, well, we were afraid of you all and what you had done, and you're going to be subversive and you're going to be spies, it didn't happen in Hawaii. Because if they had incarcerated 75% of the population, the economy had fallen apart. And so again, in Hawaii, they were happy. They were not incarcerated, and here you are being a part of the armed forces. This is really fascinating. You can do research on this. Go to the Go for Broke or 442, and General Dahlquist from Minnesota was in charge, and there were 200 Texans on top of a hill. And they were surrounded by Germans, and so they had to go up, and they had to go up in a way where they were not seen, so they were climbing up cliffs and everything. And what happened was that they were being shot to pieces. And what happened at the end, General Dahlquist asked for a report of troops, and he says, "This is disrespectful. Where's the troops?" He said, "That's all we have left." And so they had about 200 Go for Broke 442 killed and over 800 who were wounded. And so my question is, the Lost Battalion, was that a good balance and a good sacrifice of men? Until 2000, and I'll just go with this, is there was only one Medal of Honor. And as they went back at year 2000, they reviewed the history of the battle and the action, and so they were awarded 20 more Medal of Honors. But imagine, so you represent me, you men and women, and your family is incarcerated behind barbed wire. And so you have been deemed to be spies, fifth column. You're going to subvert your own government. And so you are fighting for this country to prove that your family and your genetics is loyal to this country. So what do you do when you're up against unmentionable, unqualified kinds of battle? You still sacrifice yourself in order to prove that you are deemed loyal to this country. So you aren't afraid of losing your life because you're doing it for a much larger ideal. In Minnesota, we had quite a few Americans, Japanese Americans, who were there for interpretation, and to undercover, translate, and there are quite a few who settled there after the service. General Clark recognized the heroics of the 100th Infantry. Again, President Truman. And it's kind of curious that at that time, in 1946, you fought not only enemy, but you fought prejudice and you won. And that's true, but even today, and you'll see some of the things I talk about, we have not truly won all the respect that we should. 1946, most of us were liberated from our camps. My family and I went back to, not to Vacaville, but to Elk Grove or Florin. And I still remember being in a church gymnasium with cords going across and with blankets going across to separate families. 40 years after internment, the United States government finally admitted its mistake, and this was done with a formal apology to the Japanese American community. Long, long civil rights battle, and Minoru Yasui from Hood River, he was a newly minted lawyer from University of Oregon, and he purposefully violated the curfew at 11 o'clock and was arrested. He died in 1986, but because of his family and others supporting this, I was with Governor Brown when they signed the Minoru Yasui Day, and it's dated March 28th, 2016. So again, what a wonderful recognition, and I appreciate Governor Brown for what she had done. Kind of interesting in the Supreme Court Justice Murphy, and you can read this, but I think it's so important. It goes over the very brink of constitutional power, falls into the ugly abyss of racism. And he goes on, a free people who have embraced the principles set forth in the Constitution of the United States. And so it's difficult to be a minority voice when everybody else is telling you you are wrong. The Supreme Court, I think, is hugely important. When you think about, and I hand out little small constitutions to students, and I talk to you as community, faculty, staff, students, alums, and basically when we study books and things, it's just pieces of paper, doesn't mean anything, but until we, you, people in this audience, take a stand, and I like to use athletic metaphors, you got to get some skin in this game. Things are not going to happen. Things are not going to change. Things are not going to be understood unless somebody stands up and says, you know what, this is not right. My background, Barbara and I went to Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We were there, taught at Madison. I went to northern Iowa as a dean, and then to southeastern Louisiana University. That was called SLU, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The locals called it SLU, or Slow Learners University. Auburn University, I was chancellor there, and then, like I said, a search firm came and said, we need you up in Minnesota. Was there for 7 years, turned it around, and in the system for a year, developing international programs. And Dr. Peck, I was in international studies also. I was retired for 6 years. I wrote monthly articles for Gannett paper, and then the call came from a search firm and asked if we would come out. Hammond, Louisiana. When we're going from Iowa to Louisiana, we saw a movie called Blaze. Some of you older people remember that. It's about Earl Long, and it's entertaining. He had a girlfriend, a stripper, and called Blaze. And we thought it was an entertaining movie. Bad news, it was true. And so again, you're going from Iowa to Louisiana, and we had so much happening, and we learned so much. When I first went to Louisiana, African Americans were the majority minority, and as I visited, we would encourage the minority population to come to their school. They can go to Southern, that's the LSU system, or Grambling, which was in ours. But I encouraged the folks because this was their neighborhood schools, and they should feel comfortable and welcoming. I had 22 African American ministers come on campus, first time in 134-year history of that institution. And I was talking to them, and I said, you know what? You need to speak to your flock. You need to tell them that they need to get an education. And they kind of looked at me, but it was the first time they've been invited on campus. Excuse me. And so I said, you know what? In Louisiana, you can picture a pond, and you're a frog, and the economy goes bad, the pond dries up, and you die. And they started saying, amen. And I'll tell you, I felt like Jesse Jackson. Every time I said something, he said, amen, wow. And so then I started getting revved up, you know. And I said, but if you send your kids to school, amen. They're like egrets. They can take wing. They can go away, get a job, and send money home. And you know what? At the end, one of the ministers came over and said, can I use that story for my sermon on Sunday? I said, absolutely. You use whatever you want. But then our enrollment soared, and it was such a delightful time. When Barbara and I left, there was a veterinarian who had about 50 African American people come in. I knew not a soul except for the good Reverend, also veterinarian. And he had a tux to say goodbye. And so again, what I'm talking to you about is we need to treat everybody with respect. We need to encourage them to come. And they got to be sincere. And you know, we talk a lot of talk. And I will tell you, it doesn't take anybody brilliant to figure out. When I talk to my grandson, he knows if Papa doesn't like him. It doesn't take a brilliant person to figure out if you're not sincere or are sincere. And so I'm telling you, if you guys are talking things that are good and what's happening, if you don't get a little skin in the game, it's not going to happen. When we were there in Louisiana, we had a large home underneath a pecan tree, and this gentleman came by, and he said, hey, finally got tired of just talking. He says, what are you? I says, I'm one of you all. How'd you figure? He's a big man. I says, well, Mr. Ski Row, your name ends in a vowel. My name is Saigo. My name ends in a vowel. I'm one of you all. He put his arm around my shoulder about this far from my nose and said, what part of Sicily are you from, son? And after that, we became the most wonderful friends. In Montgomery, Alabama, as you drive into town, its billboard says, birthplace of Civil War, Civil Rights Movement. I thought those were awfully contrasting comments. We worked, and when I was there, we had 13 years of the civil rights decision, desegregation, and we settled it. And so again, great things were happening down there, and that it was most appreciated by the locals and by Bill Harris, who was president of Alabama State, which was down the street. And he and I would meet. He was like 6'5", and he was huge. And he and I were great friends, but we got a lot done because nobody knew who I was. I wasn't black and I wasn't white. And so we got so much achieved in a very short time. Moving on, we went from being chancellor at Auburn to Minnesota, and it was like a perfect storm. We had minorities who were writing to other minorities in high school and in community colleges telling them not to come. Imagine, our enrollments were going down because what was happening is that the respect for our minority enrollment was not taking place. So people were talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Students, we were building values of diversity. All students who came to our university took a sensitivity course on racial relations, and we think that was helpful. We've had all kinds of lawsuits, you can see, and that we had to take a stand. But mind you, when university presidents take a stand, you put your family and your life and your career on the line. We had unequal pay for women, and that had been going on, a lawsuit for years. And I said, you know what, we're going to have this settled, unequal pay. And we settled it, and that whole controversy that there were, but the difficulty there was the system then created a domino effect, because not only St. Cloud had to deal with it, Mankato had to deal with it, Superior, on and on. We had a class action lawsuit from the Jewish community, and I remember going into Twin Cities, meeting with 6 rabbis, and since I was the only person they could sue, they were angry with me. So we're having lunch. I'm being yelled at by the top of their lung, and I was sweating, and I'm the good guy, and yet people are yelling at me because we have so much anti-Semitism in the community. And so again, we are able to deal with this. We have worked with it, we settled it, we educated our community and our university, and things moved forward. We had LGBT issues. We had male homecoming queen, and we had death threats. And so I wrote a letter of support in the local newspaper. And I had a request from 2 area legislators to resign. And so when you make stands, it is not that easy or that inconsequential. The NCAA, we had issues there with the standards that we have for mascots, and I wrote them a letter asking for their support. And again, another foundation person would, of course, get on me, and as Nathan mentioned, NCAA has that 10-year review. But again, this was not an easy thing to deal with. I think you've seen pictures of this. If you're the Cleveland Indians or the Cleveland Asians, on and on. People said that there's no evidence that this is hurtful, but the NCAA, the NAACP, the civil rights, so many have gone against how hurtful the mascot issue has been. And then I told you about some of the issues I had to deal with here, and the letters we received. And it was not comfortable for me or for my family. So again, when you folks will talk about issues that are important for LC, you've got to be there to make sure that those things happen. The retirement came, and then we got this call. And I was kind of curious. The search firm says enrollment's down 9%, 2 retrenchments, that's bankruptcies, cut German, geography, geology, physics, cut numerous, no confidence votes 2.5 years ago, the president, provost, vice president, and would you be interested in a 2-year contract? So again, no, yeah. I'm going to move really quickly now. We got 2 hours, but I won't hold you that long. At SOU, we had to change the attitude. It was such a depressing place because everybody was upset. I had to become accessible to everybody. We had to get out of our silos. I met with everybody. I met with the custodians and the administration of the athletics. And when I went there was like 30 athletic groups and trainers. And I said, I don't have a whole lot to say to you, but I'm going to tell you one thing, you better listen up. I want you to win every game. And you know what? They did. And that year in football, we won the national championship. And the coach had gone there from Grants Pass, and he said, in 4 years, we'll win a national championship. And I said, what's a big whoop? I come here 6 months, we won a national championship. The other thing that I want to leave with you is when you have a dominant community and they say we're perfect, we're kind, we're respectful. You know, why change? It's really difficult to change. If there's perfection, why would you question? How is that racist? And for example, you know, people just come up and ask you, and this is what happened to our son and others, what are you doing here? And even in Alabama, where we were at the country club and my son was playing tennis, went to the country club, and here's a guy with nice whites, and he's like 6'2", and he comes up, and even words, but the way they say it, may I help you? Means, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, oh, I'm the chancellor, and this is my son, he's here to play. Oh, please come this way. So just even tone and getting into your space is not respectful. And so, again, Barb and I had to walk out of a celebration in Medford where we had been guests of really important people. And the same kind of thing happened. I was asked, I had a suit and tie on, what are you doing here? And so, you know, it was not, I can't go into all that, but so Barbara and I left, and it offended a lot of people. But what I wanted people to understand, if I can't stand up for you all, if I can't stand up for what is right, who can? And for me to know that it's wrong, and for me to know that, well, I'll let it go by, I'm not doing you any service. When you hear people talk and you don't agree, if you stay silent, you're condoning that behavior. We have a whole new board of trustees. We have minority lunches. And look at my cabinet. When I first came, it was 100% white. We have 2 African American women who are fantastic, 1 Jewish person, 1 lesbian, 2 white, and of course, me. We have tremendous connection to the Hispanic community. Our enrollments, remember the reason I came is the enrollments are going down. And so then what happened was that you can't spend more money than you make. And so we decided, well, we're going to have to do something. We went after the freshman class. We increased the minority students, but it went from 18 to 20. That's not new in there. Freshman class, we had the largest in 12 years, second largest in 20 years. Faculty and staff minorities, about 10%. We're going to do something about that because this is what we're doing now. On every search, we have search advocates, and we didn't have that before. I think we had too many people who had friends that they were hiring, and we need to have ourselves to be a little bit more honest. Pirates to Raiders, that's from the Phoenix Talent community. The Bulldogs to Raiders, that's in the Medford community. And these are 7th grade Latino students and parents that have to sign up and say we're going to get good grades, and if we do, we'll be admitted to Southern Oregon University as freshmen. So again, we're focusing on recruitment, retention, respect, graduate, faculty and staff. We're all responsible, just like everybody here is responsible for LC. We must engage in awareness and events for diversity. And again, what I'm asking everybody, and you all need to do this too, trustees, administrators, division leaders, faculty, staff, and students, you all have to be a part of the solution. You can't just say, yes, we support this and not show up. And I think Nathan has talked about showing up. If you don't show up, you're not doing the job. And so again, it takes a lot of energy to get from here to there. But it's because of not me, but it's because of the people who believe in things that we're talking about and making them happen. They're the ones, you are the ones that will make the difference. Otherwise, like the Chief Justice said, the Constitution is just paper. The reality is you make it into something that's livable and a democracy for this country. So, you know, thank you so much for being here. We went through a whole lot, about 3 hours of lecture, but I wanted to cover what I needed to for your benefit because I don't get to come up all the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saigo. We do have a little bit of time if folks have any questions that they would like to direct to Dr. Saigo.
What's your plans now? When your contract ends in 2 years, are they thinking of staying down there a little longer, or what are your next plans?
Well, we have a real deal for you. We have a huge house in St. Cloud that you can have for a song. And Barbara put a bid in on a home in Ashland. And so we're most likely going to stay in the valley. We thought, because we met at Corvallis, and a lot of our family had gone to Willamette, that we would, and she calls it the wet side, but I think we like the dry side. Plus, when the Gannett paper called me, and they had a series called Where Are They Now? And so we've been gone, almost 8-10 years. So what do you miss? I said, I miss ice fishing, I miss my friends, I miss brats and beer. And I said, but I've never drunk so much wine as I have in Southern Oregon. And being a university president, it's tough, but I've done that latter part pretty well. Drinking wine. Yes, sir.
I'm actually from Southern Oregon. I'm from Medford, and I can tell you that I'm very happy that you walked out of the place if you felt uncomfortable.
Well, I appreciate that, because sometimes when I do things, I wonder if I should have.
Yeah. More people should walk out of places like Medford. Anyway, sorry. So with Southern Oregon University, I'm hearing that there's been outreach to the Southern Oregon population,
Yeah.
specifically Hispanic populations at McLaughlin Middle School and in the Phoenix community.
Boy, you know your stuff.
Well, I
Wow.
live there, so
Oh, okay.
yeah. I'm curious though, as a regional institution, is that the goal to really enroll more individuals from Southern Oregon, or have you all had to step outside of Southern Oregon? And
That's a
go
great question.
regionally and nationally?
Yeah, when I first went, I'd go to all these town hall meetings, and I've been there, like trying to keep my eyes down so nobody would ask me questions. And so they would ask this: are you a regional university or a destination university? Right? Mm-hmm. Are you that liberal arts university on the hill? So I was starting to get angry. I was in Klamath Falls. They asked me the same thing. I was in Bedford. They asked me the same thing. And then I kind of sat 40,000 feet up. And I looked down and I thought, why are they asking this question? It was because they were angry. They were angry at the university because we had ignored the community. And so I said, all right, you asked me a question, look at our name. That's not even a question. What do you mean? Southern Oregon University, that's regional, right? Not even a question. Second part, are you a destination? Well, if anybody wants, and we had like luau night, Friday night, we had over 600 people. We got people from Idaho, international, and Barbara and I will be going down to Guanajuato to sign an agreement again, 47 years, and we've had tremendous exchanges between the two. So we got people from Germany, Japan, South Korea, all over. So we refocused ourselves on being a regional university, but if anybody else wants to come, you all come.
Thank you.
Great question.
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about obviously the impact that you had as a child in internment camps, and I feel like it's very timely because of a lot of the anti-immigrant rhetoric in our news today, and I wonder, as a person who lived through that, what do you, it seemed probably for some of the younger people in here, it seems like ancient history that happened, but it was within some people's lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
of course yours, that this happened. This is real stuff. And to me, it's terrifying. It's very scary to me that presidential candidates who are likely to receive the nomination are, at least some, are discussing the idea of banning certain
Yep.
groups of people based on their ethnicity, which is not a far cry from internment camps.
Yep.
I wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, and again, I think that the political system has empowered people to come out and say what they feel. But on the other hand, our institutions should have that conversation. And just like our friends in Medford, there are, I'd say 90% of people have been just wonderful. And Barbara and I being honored by the local chamber in Medford. We go to the country club, but others tell me there's still so much to do. When I walked out, there's a couple from SOU sitting with us, and the husband said, "Can I walk out with you?" And now our hostess is really angry. "You're embarrassing us," okay? And there's maybe, 20 tables with 10 people around them. These are the mucky mucks of the community. They're the ones that donate big money to the Criterion Theater. And so when they told me that I had offended somebody, I says, "We're leaving." And so David says, "Can I walk out with you?" I said, "Absolutely." So he walks out, puts me out. His wife calls me the next day. Says, "You know why my husband walked out with you?" I said, "No." Says, "We adopted an Asian baby a few years ago, and the stupidity of the community. And so thank you for walking out." But every time you do something like that, you get some skin in the game. On the other hand, you'll offend a lot of people. And some people feel that's not a thing that a university president should do. But again, I come back. If I don't do things like that, who's going to do it for you? All right, what else? Barbara?
You had one more slide. Did you take it out about the things that you had to do? Because it kind of sums up. And maybe you took it out because you're being modest, but I think that you can see from what he experienced as a kid growing up, the camp was one thing. Coming back into the community after the camp was about as bad because the society hated him, hated the families. And so they kind of had to stick together out of self-preservation, put their heads down, demonstrate that they were good citizens, good workers, all this kind of stuff. And so, as a child, Roy experiencing these things, watching his brother get beat up during freshman initiation, things like that, were so bad. And then every place that we've been, for all of the almost 49 years we've been married, we've come across wonderful people, a lot of wonderful people, and occasionally some real jerks. Really unbelievable things that have been said and attitudes that have been expressed. And if you notice, he didn't go along to get along at any point in this, and I'm so proud of him as a human being for that. He consistently stood up for principles of fairness, for having a voice for people who didn't have a voice for themselves, using his position as a president of a university to take on the NCAA and a whole bunch of schools with Indian mascots that were pretty upset about that. And all of it kind of boils down to a simple thing that I think at some point every person experiences in their life, but some more than others, and that's being bullied. He has consistently stood up at all levels, from childhood to university administration to bullies and bullying that goes on. So that's kind of the challenge, I think. I don't know what's ahead of us, but I'm sure there will be other uncomfortable moments because that's just who he is, and I'm so proud of him.
Well, the other thing, along the same thing, most society is built to stay the same. Policy is built to remain and to not have change or rock the boat. So the mascot issue, this is in a nutshell, but I was trying, as NCAA is a university president's organization. And so Pat Cormier, that I wrote the letter to, she was president, and she says, "Well, you're on the agenda, but only for 5-10 minutes." And then about 10 minutes before I was leaving my office, I had all my presentation materials. She called and says, "You can't talk to you're not on the agenda for the president's organization." And I threw it down. I thought, damn. And my assistant said, no, just take it with. And she says, "However, you can talk to the luncheon." It was about 60. You have 10 minutes. I took 30. And so I'm there, and I got my slides, and I'm talking about all the collateral damage and University of North Dakota against North Dakota and on. And so, you've got the parade, and you got Super Sioux fighting Sioux, super dogs. You got toilet covers with Fighting Sioux. You got all this stuff. And you got parades, and this is gross, but you have an Indian with X's in his eye giving a blowjob to a buffalo. And so I said, I can't deal with this. And so I go to the president's meeting, about 60 people, and there are 3 of my friends that we had lunch with right here. And they're like 6'5" apiece, and they're there. And I says, hey, you guys not interested in this? So I says, you got to forgive me. Hey, everybody, my 3 friends here aren't interested in the mascot issue. I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you a story about a little black Sambo. Saigo, we got it. They've understood when you put people to a place where they're sensitive, they can identify with. And that's what I tried to do with you guys today. And so these are the issues that are so important. But I'll tell you one thing that people in power don't like. They don't like people who don't kowtow to them. And you know, in the Deep South, uppity black, and in my life as Auburn Chancellor, President of St. Cloud, President of Southern Oregon, people that we're talking about and some of the individuals, Medford and other places, they don't like you when you look them in the eye and challenge you. They want you to kowtow. They want you to be subservient. And until we all get to a point where you get a lot of skin in the game and you put your lives on the line and you put your family's livelihood on the line, we're not going to make progress. And so, again, the same kind of thing. I'm just asking you all that every time something happens. In fact, when I was interviewing for the job at Dean in northern Iowa, there's a white kid comes up to me and he says, you know what? I have friends. And they talk about all these dumb Indians. I said, so? He says, my brother is adopted, full-blooded Indian. What am I going to do? I don't want to lose friends. I don't want to offend people. I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. At the same time, what can I do? Because if I speak up, I'm going to lose all my friends. I said, they're not much, then are they? But the best thing is trying to explain from his perspective, and I will guarantee you, if you don't get angry and you explain the circumstance, they will be your friends. One kid at Southern from Weaverville, California, said, you know, I'm so proud of you. And forgive me, he's a white kid. And he said, I want to meet you. So I said, let's go to lunch. We went to the cafeteria. Well, we're sitting there. I says, tell me about your life. So he tells me about his father and his mother. They're divorced. He says, I don't want to talk about that. And I said, fine. I says, what encouraged you? He's going to graduate this June. What encouraged you to go to school? Well, Mr. So-and-so at Weaverville High School. Okay, I want his name and his address. Now I'm going to write him a thank you note for making a difference in your life. And I want you to do something for me. So anything, what? I says, get a card, write to Mr. So-and-so, and put a $10 bill in there. More? No. Less? No. And say, dear Mr. So-and-so, you made a difference in my life. I want you at my graduation. Here's $10 for gas. I bet you he'll cry. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.